Let's dive into a really powerful psychological mechanism, one that's designed to turn someone who's just kind of browsing into a high-velocity sale. It's all built on this fascinating paradox, one that says the biggest reason people buy quickly isn't a low price. Nope, it's the precise activation of our single greatest fear, regret. So think about this. What if the best sales tool you have isn't a discount, but a simple, visible 7-day timer that just shatters decision paralysis and instantly multiplies your sales?
You see, the most powerful sales, they aren't driven by what a customer thinks they're going to gain, but by what they're terrified they might lose. This has nothing to do with features or benefits. It's all about tapping into one of our most primal motivators, that nagging fear of future regret. It's a huge shift in thinking, and honestly, it's the key to unlocking a totally different level of sales velocity.
So how do you actually do that? How do you activate that fear? Well, what if you could use a simple, visible tool to just cut right through all that indecision? I'm not just talking about a deadline, but a carefully engineered trigger, one that's designed to completely collapse the entire decision-making process. And that's the power of what we're looking at today, the 7-day timer.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at the crisis of indecision that this whole thing solves. Then, we'll break down the timer mechanism itself. After that, we'll dive deep into the psychology of why it's so incredibly effective, and finally, we'll walk through a framework for mastering it. Let's get started with where the problem even came from.
All right, let's jump into our first section, the crisis of indecision. You got to understand, this powerful sales mechanism wasn't just created in a vacuum. It was forged to solve a very modern and very paralyzing problem. We live in an age of just infinite choice. And while that sounds great, all the research shows it actually leads to paralysis. You know what I mean. When you're faced with an absolute avalanche of options, what do potential customers do? They freeze. They get completely stuck in this endless loop of comparing and overthinking. This crisis really demanded a trigger, something sharp, something definitive, to jolt them out of that inertia and force a decision.
And the solution? Well, it lies in a foundational principle of influence, one defined by the great Dr. Robert Cialdini: scarcity. The idea is so simple. We see things as more valuable when there are fewer of them. A sold-out concert, a limited edition pair of sneakers. The rarity itself is what creates the desire. And this became the blueprint for breaking that decision paralysis.
So why 7 days, right? Why not 24 hours or a month? Well, it turns out that 7 days is the strategic sweet spot. It's just long enough for someone to feel like they've made a thought-out decision, so they don't get buyer's remorse. But it's also short enough to create real, tangible urgency. Think of it this way. Indecision is an internal state of limbo. The timer, that's a powerful external force that basically says, hey, a decision has to be made. It's built to turn that fragile interest into a firm commitment. And in the process, it dramatically shortens the whole sales cycle. Okay, so we understand the why. Now let's get into the how. In this next section, we're going to pull back the curtain on the core mechanism of the 7-day timer. And believe me, this is so much more than just a clock on a page. It's a completely engineered psychological process. The source material actually calls this a phased psychological intervention. Sounds pretty intense, right? But it unfolds in 4 really clear steps. First, you anchor the offer with genuine high-value bonuses. We're not talking fake value here. This is about stacking on irresistible extras. Second, you initiate the lock with that visible countdown timer. Third, as that clock ticks down, you trigger loss. The focus completely shifts from what they gain to what they're just about to lose. And fourth, the result, you multiply sales, creating that massive final spike. And this right here, this is the critical mental shift. Without a timer, the question in your head is this thing worth my money? But that timer, it totally reframes the entire debate. The question becomes, what am I going to lose if I don't act right now? The focus just flips from the pain of paying to the pain of missing out on all those valuable bonuses.
And the data, well, the data proves this out completely. For the first 5 days of an offer, you'll probably see a slow, steady trickle of sales from the early adopters. But in those final 48 hours, day 6 and day 7, the volume just explodes. The vast majority of sales are crammed right at the end. And that's not random. It's the engineered result of that mounting psychological pressure.
So we've seen what it is and how it works. But now, for the deepest layer, why is it so darn effective? Well, it all comes down to 2 powerful cognitive biases that are just hardwired into our brains.
Okay, the main driver here is something called loss aversion. And think about it like this. Finding $20 on the street feels good, right? But losing $20 feels awful.
Psychologists have actually found that the pain of losing is about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining. So, by anchoring an offer with these great bonuses and then starting a timer, you shift the user's mindset. They start to feel like they already own those bonuses, and that timer is threatening to rip them away. This triggers an intense, gut-level desire to act just to avoid that pain of loss.
And then there's this second principle at play called the Zeigarnik Effect. This is basically our brain's obsession with unfinished business. You know, like a cliffhanger at the end of a TV show. It just sticks in your mind. A countdown timer on an offer creates that exact same mental tension. It's a highly visible, incomplete task that your brain desperately wants to resolve. It's a mental itch that can only be scratched by making a decision and finishing the purchase.
So, these two psychological forces work together to create this huge shift in the customer's internal monologue. Without urgency, the question is simply, should I buy this? A question you can put off forever. But the timer forces a brand new, much more pressing question. Should I buy this now? It just collapses the timeline from maybe someday to today.
So we totally get the psychology. Now let's get practical. How do you actually apply these principles effectively and, just as important, ethically? Well, that brings us to our framework for mastery.
Look, mastering this isn't about just slapping a random countdown timer on your website. That's just a tactic, not a real strategy. True mastery requires a deliberate, three-step process. First, you have to clearly define the loss. Second, you have to make sure that urgency is real. And third, you have to sequence that urgency for maximum impact.
Principle 1, define the loss. This means your messaging, your copy, it has to pivot. Instead of saying, get 20% off, your headline becomes, your 20% off discount expires tonight. Instead of join our course, it's last chance to claim your bonus training module. You have to frame inaction as the failure. This directly triggers that loss aversion we talked about by showing them exactly what they will lose forever when that clock hits 0.
Principle 2 is completely non-negotiable. The urgency must be verifiable. The deadline has to be real. If a customer sees your expired offer is still available on day 8, you've just destroyed all trust and all credibility. The whole psychological mechanism just falls apart. You have to use tools that will automatically remove the offer or change the price the second that timer hits 0. Without authenticity, this whole strategy will totally backfire on you. And principle 3 is all about timing. Sequence the urgency. This is not a sledgehammer you just use on every single person who visits your site. It's a scalpel. Urgency is most effective when you introduce it as the final call to action, specifically for users who have already shown they're really interested. Someone who abandons their shopping cart? Perfect candidate for a timed offer. The last few emails in a product launch sequence? Another great example. By saving this powerful tool for moments of peak interest, you make it the final irresistible push they need to commit.
This brings us to our conclusion, to the core insight that really ties everything we've talked about together. It's all about understanding what the true enemy of the sale really is. You know, when it comes down to it, this whole system works because it's not about tricking someone into buying something they don't want. It's about empowering someone who is already interested, but they're just stuck in that decision paralysis. They are actively looking for a reason, a justification to act now. The timer provides that justification. It's the external nudge they need to get over their own inertia.
And that brings us to the final core idea. The best marketing, it doesn't push people through a funnel, it pulls them toward value. And by strategically using scarcity and urgency, you are simply and powerfully making the cost of waiting far too high to bear. Thanks for tuning in.